The boardroom was cold. Not temperature cold, but the kind of cold that comes from polished mahogany tables and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I sat in the leather chair with my hand on my 8-month pregnant belly, watching my husband Michael stand at the head of the table like he owned the room. He did own most of it. He owns most of everything. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth and confident, "we have a situation that needs addressing." My stomach tightened. Not from pregnancy. From instinct. "My wife's current condition," he continued, gesturing toward me like I was a spreadsheet, "presents a financial risk we cannot ignore." The room went silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence. The kind where everyone is uncomfortable but pretending not to be. 15 pairs of eyes shifted. Some looked at me. Most looked at the table. "The pregnancy," Michael said clearly, "will require significant distraction during a critical expansion phase. I'm proposing we temporarily restructure her voting authority. For stability, of course." That was the moment I understood. This wasn't discussion. This was performance. And I was the prop. The investors nodded. Actually nodded, like he just said something reasonable instead of something that felt like a knife between my ribs. I watched their heads bob in unison, and I realized something terrible. This wasn't impulsive. This was calculated. Michael had prepared them. They already agreed. "The proposal is straightforward," continued James, the company lawyer, sliding a document across the table toward me. "Temporary suspension of voting rights during the maternity period. Restoration upon return to full capacity." My eyes scanned the familiar clause. But something caught my attention. Something about family succession events and mandatory maternal oversight. I'd seen this before. I'd written this before. "What's the timeline?" I asked quietly. "Immediate," Michael said. "The board votes Friday." Friday. 3 days away. I looked at the page again, and a small detail jumped out at me. One I'd embedded 5 years ago, thinking I was protecting the company. One that suddenly felt like it might protect me instead. That night, I lay in bed unable to sleep, my mind returning to years earlier when this company was drowning. Michael had just taken over from his father. The markets were collapsing. Investors were panicking. We were days from catastrophe. I wasn't supposed to be more than arm candy back then. I was just the wife, beautiful and supportive. But I'd studied business in school. I'd worked at an investment firm before marriage. I'd seen what was coming before anyone else. So I'd stayed up for weeks, restructuring contracts, renegotiating terms with key suppliers, rebuilding investor confidence with careful phone calls and detailed projections. Michael took the credit. He always took the credit, but the company survived because of the foundation I'd quietly laid. I'd also inserted protections. Safeguards, I called them. One specifically for unforeseen leadership incapacity. One that required maternal consent for any action affecting legal heirs. I'd written it thinking I was being thoughtful. I had no idea I'd be the heir I was protecting. I remembered the scandal too. 2 years ago, a major account discovered accounting errors in our department. Not our fault, but Michael's reputation was at risk. The media was circling. Investors were nervous. Michael came to me that night, defeated and afraid. I'd held him and told him we'd fix it. And we did. I stepped back publicly, took temporary authority from him to show the company's commitment to oversight, and then used that authority to prove everything was under control. The scandal faded. Michael's image recovered. But what Michael forgot was that when I transferred that temporary authority back to him, I'd done it with conditions. Specific conditions with specific triggers. Expiration dates. Clauses that required his consent to extend. I'd thought I was being smart. Protecting him. Now I realized I'd been protecting myself without knowing it. "We need to talk," I said the next morning. Michael was putting on his tie, already mentally somewhere else. We lived in separate wings of the penthouse most nights. Separate schedules, separate lives, very much married. "About the meeting," he said, not turning around. "Sophia, it's just business. It's not personal." But that was exactly the problem. For him, it never was personal. Everything was strategy. Everything was leverage. "You called me a risk," I said. "In front of the senior team. In front of investors." "You are a risk," he replied, finally turning to face me. Right now, you're distracted. Your priorities have shifted. I'm not blaming you. It's biology. But it's fact. Did you speak to legal counsel before this? He hesitated. A fraction too long. Of course I did. They recommended. Without me. My voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp. Without you, he confirmed, and then he left the room. I found the document on his desk. The restructured shareholder agreement. Dozens of pages, carefully marked with revisions. My shares weren't being removed. They were being placed in a maternal trust, pending review. Oversight by a co-signer. A co-signer I recognized immediately. His mother, Victoria. Victoria, who'd always seen me as beneath the family. Victoria, who'd asked at every holiday why I hadn't produced an heir yet. Victoria, who was about to control my financial future while I was vulnerable and pregnant. I felt the baby kick again. Harder this time. Like she was angry too. I was having a girl. We'd found out last week. I'd wanted to tell Michael at dinner. Make it special. He was traveling for work. I photographed every page of the revised agreement with my phone. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the original corporate bylaws. The ones I'd helped write 5 years ago when the company was being restructured. My fingers flew through the document, searching for the exact language I needed. I didn't reach out to many people. I couldn't. This was Michael's world, and everyone in it was, at some level, his friend. But there was one exception. Thomas, the company's CFO, and one of the few people Michael hadn't managed to completely control. We'd worked together for years, quietly, building the systems that kept this place running. He'd watched Michael take credit for my work enough times to know what was really happening. I called him late, after Michael was asleep. The restructuring, I said without preamble. Is it legal? Thomas was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. Legally questionable. Ethically worse. The board is uncomfortable, but they're afraid of instability. Would they support a challenge? Some would. Others are too afraid of Michael. But not you, I said. But not me, Thomas agreed. Sophia, there's something else. A clause I just noticed while reviewing the amendments. It's in the original bylaws. Paragraph 4, Section C. I spent the next morning in the archives, pulling the original corporate documents. I'd helped write them, but seeing them now felt different. Each page felt like a shield. The bylaws were clear. Any major restructuring during a family succession event, and legally, a pregnancy absolutely qualified, required unanimous consent from all maternal stakeholders. The clause had been written to prevent future husbands from doing exactly what Michael was trying to do. It was meant to protect women like me. The universe has a strange sense of irony. I made copies. Multiple copies. I created a file on a password-protected drive. Then I texted my OB/GYN, Dr. Patel, and asked for a written confirmation that the pregnancy was medically sound. She sent it within an hour. I added it to my file. Everything I needed was there. Documentation, legal standing, medical proof. But I didn't move yet. Patience had always been my advantage. The charity gala was Michael's stage. He loved these events. The wealthy gathered in designer clothes, making charitable donations that made them feel good about themselves. I was there too, 8 months pregnant in a custom Valentino dress, smiling at people who barely saw me. Michael stood near the bar, drink in hand, telling a story to a group of investors. I watched from across the room, and I heard him laugh. Timing could have been better, he said about the pregnancy. But my wife understands. She's stepping back gracefully. No drama, no complications. My hands clenched. No drama. No complications. As if this child I was carrying was an inconvenience to be managed, not a person to be celebrated. One of the investors, a woman named Patricia, caught my eye from across the room. She'd made a fortune in real estate. She had that sharp look of someone who understood exactly what was happening. She walked over to me later. "Are you stepping down?" she asked directly. "From what?" I replied. "The board," she said. "From your position." Thursday morning, I received an email. The shareholder vote was happening tomorrow. The meeting had been scheduled for Friday afternoon. Barely 48 hours of notice. I knew immediately it was intentional. Short notice meant less time for questions. Less time for anyone to mobilize against the proposal. Michael had learned from me, apparently. He was using strategy, using speed, using every advantage he could find. The email included the full agenda. His proposal would be voted on at 3 o'clock. By 4:30, the decision would likely be final. I read the notice requirements in the shareholder bylaws. Detailed, specific, and absolutely violated by this timeline. The vote itself was illegal. The process was illegal. And I was the only one who could prove it. I called Thomas. Tomorrow. 3 o'clock. Be ready. That night, I sat in the nursery we'd been setting up, the room Michael rarely visited. Pale yellow walls. Soft lighting. A crib I'd picked out myself. A mobile with tiny stars that seemed to promise a world better than the one I was living in. I pulled up the clause one more time. Paragraph 4. Section C. I read it slowly, carefully, until every word was burned into my memory. Any action affecting a legal heir during a succession event requires unanimous consent of all maternal stakeholders. Legal heir. That was the key phrase. From the moment of conception, in most states, a child is considered a legal heir for purposes of inheritance and succession. I was pregnant. That made this baby a legal heir. And any action affecting that heir, including removing my voting authority, required my consent. Michael had violated this. Intentionally or not, he'd violated it. And tomorrow, I was going to remind everyone of that fact. I stood in the nursery for a long time that night, my hand on the crib rail. Doubt crept in. It always does before you make a big move. What if Thomas was wrong? What if the clause wasn't enforceable? What if I was destroying my marriage for nothing? The baby kicked, hard and deliberate. A reminder that this wasn't about my marriage anymore. It was about protecting someone who couldn't protect themselves. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. Heading to the office early. See you at the meeting tomorrow. No, good luck. No, I hope you're feeling okay. Just logistics, like I was a meeting on his calendar instead of the person carrying his child. I looked at the crib one more time. I thought about all the ways I'd sacrificed for this family. All the late nights restructuring contracts. All the times I'd stepped back publicly to protect Michael's image. All the moments I'd chosen loyalty over myself. And now he was trying to take away my voice while I was at my most vulnerable. The doubt faded. What remained was clarity. I called Patricia, the real estate investor from the gala. I'd been thinking about her all night, about the sharp intelligence in her eyes, about how quickly she'd understood what Michael was doing. I need to show you something, I said. Before tomorrow's vote. She agreed to meet me for coffee that morning. I brought the original bylaws, the medical documentation, and the revised shareholder agreement Michael had attempted to implement. Patricia read through everything slowly, her expression growing darker with each page. He's trying to use your pregnancy as justification for removing your authority, she said finally, while simultaneously using it to justify why you shouldn't have a voice in the decision. That's not business strategy. That's just predatory. Can you share this with the other early investors? I asked. Before the vote? Yes. Especially anyone who's been with the company since the restructuring 5 years ago. Anyone who would know about this clause. Patricia smiled. This time, it was a kind smile. Give me the documents. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what they're voting on. Michael was glowing. I could see it the moment I walked into the office. That particular kind of confidence that comes from believing you've already won. He was in his corner office, speaking with his advisors, laughing about something. He actually believed I didn't have leverage. He actually believed I'd fallen into the role he'd written for me. The beautiful, docile wife grateful to be taken care of. He didn't understand that I'd been taking care of him the entire time. That everything he'd built had my fingerprints on it. That I'd been quietly strengthening the company for years while he took the credit. And now I'd finally decided to take what was mine. He saw me in the hallway, smiled, and gave me a thumbs up. Big day, he said. After this vote, we can finally relax and focus on the baby. He meant it too. He genuinely believed that once he'd isolated my authority, once I was completely dependent on him, then everything would be perfect. Then I'd be grateful. I smiled back and said nothing. The shareholder meeting started at 3 o'clock. exactly as scheduled. The room was full. Investors, board members, media observers. Michael was in his element, confident and commanding, taking his seat at the head of the table like he was coronating himself as king. I sat at the far end. Pregnant. Quiet. Apparently powerless. Michael opened the meeting with the standard formalities. Reports, updates, financial projections. Everything normal. Everything rehearsed. Then he moved to the proposal. Before we proceed, I said quietly, raising my hand. The room paused. Michael's smile didn't waver, but his jaw tightened. Yes, he said, his voice still smooth. I'd like to address the shareholders. I stood slowly, carefully, one hand supporting my belly. Every eye in the room tracked me as I walked to the front. I held up the original bylaws. Paragraph 4, Section C. I read it aloud, slowly and clearly, so everyone heard every word. This clause was written 5 years ago, I said, during the company restructuring. It was designed to prevent exactly what's being proposed today. The room was completely silent. Any action affecting a legal heir during a succession event requires unanimous maternal consent, I continued. I am pregnant. This child is a legal heir. And I do not consent to this restructuring. I could see the moment understanding hit the room. The lawyers looked at each other. The investors leaned forward. Michael's face went completely white. Furthermore, I said, placing another document on the table, the notice requirements for this vote were violated. Shareholders must receive 48 hours notice for major restructuring votes. This vote was scheduled with less than 48 hours. It's procedurally invalid. Thomas stood up from his seat. I can confirm the bylaw is real and enforceable, he said. Ms. Sophia is correct on both counts. Chaos erupted, but I remained calm. This was the moment where everything could have fallen apart, but it didn't because I'd been careful. Because I'd gathered evidence. Because I'd been thinking strategically while Michael had been thinking he'd already won. James, the company lawyer, was scrambling through papers, his face red. Michael was whispering urgently with his advisors. But the damage was done. There's more, I said, and I could see Michael's face change. He knew there was more. He could see it in my eyes. I projected the original amendments onto the screen. The changes Michael had attempted to make without proper consent. The shifts in voting authority, the restructuring of share allocations, the changes to succession planning. All of these amendments, I said, were done without proper consent, without following required procedures. And many of them violate the exact clause he apparently forgot existed. An investor stood up. Then another. Then Patricia, who'd clearly shared the documents with the right people. This is fiduciary misconduct, one investor said. We should be discussing removing him from authority, not removing her. I could have left then. I could have declared victory and walked out. But I wasn't done. There was more the shareholders needed to understand. This is about more than procedure, I said. This is about competence. And I want to walk everyone through the financial projections. I'd spent weeks preparing these. Detailed risk modeling, market analysis, succession planning. All of it demonstrated that a healthy pregnancy and new parent actually strengthened succession stability, not weakened it. It showed that removing my authority would create more risk, not less. Mature companies plan for leadership succession, I explained. They build redundancy. They develop second and third options. What Michael was proposing was the opposite. It was consolidating power and removing oversight. That's not stability. That's a recipe for disaster. Thomas nodded along, confirming every point. The CFO's support mattered. He was trusted. He was neutral. And he was saying I was right. The investors were taking notes now, looking at each other with expressions that had shifted from curiosity to concern. The chairperson called for a procedural review. The legal team needed time to analyze the bylaw, the notice violations, the amendments. The room cleared into smaller discussions. Michael came and found me in the hallway. His face was carefully controlled, but I could see the fear underneath. Sophia, he said, we can fix this. We can find a way. No, I said simply. We can't. Not this time. You don't want to do this, he said, his voice dropping. You don't want to be the woman who destroyed her own company while pregnant. I'm not destroying anything, I replied. I'm protecting it. Protecting it from someone who forgot that strength and competence look like yours only when there's someone competent behind the scenes. He went pale. You knew, he whispered. You knew this whole time about the clause. I wrote the clause, I said. I wrote it for exactly this scenario. I just never thought you'd be the one creating it. The board reconvened 2 hours later. The chairperson stood and made an official statement. It is the determination of the board that the proposed restructuring lacks procedural validity. Notice requirements were violated. The shareholder proposal was illegal. Furthermore, the legal department confirms the validity of paragraph 4, section C of the corporate bylaws. Any action affecting legal heirs requires unanimous maternal consent, which has not been obtained. My heart was pounding, but my face remained calm. Therefore, the chairperson continued, we are formally dismissing the restructuring proposal. However, we are also instructing the board to undertake a complete procedural review of all actions taken by the CEO over the past 6 months. Michael stood abruptly, his chair scraping back loudly. This is ridiculous, he said. I was protecting the company. From what? Asked Patricia. Your pregnant wife? The woman who restructured this company 5 years ago and kept it stable ever since? That woman is a risk. Investors started speaking over each other. Questions about Michael's judgment. Questions about whether his other decisions had been similarly self-serving. The emergency motion came quickly. A proposal to suspend Michael's executive authority pending a full leadership review. To bring in external auditors. To examine every decision he'd made over the past 18 months. The CEO position he'd been so confident about protecting was now at risk. I watched him from across the room. For the first time, Michael looked small. Not powerful. Not strategic. Just a man who'd made a terrible miscalculation. One of the investors, a woman named Catherine, caught my eye and raised her eyebrow. A question. I gave a small nod. Permission. I'd like to propose, Catherine said, that Sophia Hartley take the interim leadership role during this review period. She has demonstrated superior strategic thinking, knowledge of company procedures, and... No, I said, standing. I don't want his position. I want transparency. I want ethics. And I want procedures to be respected. But I don't want to replace him as CEO. Michael looked shocked. What I do want, I continued, is a seat on the audit committee. I want access to all financial records. And I want a voice in succession planning. The vote happened at 4:15. Michael's executive authority was suspended. An external audit was ordered. New procedures were implemented. The shareholders voted unanimously on all counts. When it was over, there was no triumph in the room. No celebration. Just a kind of exhausted acknowledgement that the house of cards they'd all been living in had finally been exposed. Michael stood to leave, and I finally saw the full weight of what had happened. The humiliation wasn't loud. It was quiet. It was losing control in front of everyone who mattered to him. He looked at me once, and in that moment, I saw something I'd never seen before. Genuine fear. He'd believed he was invulnerable. He'd believed his position was unshakable. And I'd just shaken it to its foundation. I did not look away. The boardroom emptied slowly. People stopped to speak with me. To congratulate me. To express their concern about my health, my pregnancy, my plans. Are you okay? Thomas asked when we were finally alone. No, I said honestly. But I will be. He squeezed my shoulder and left me standing in the empty room. I sat down at the table, the place where, just hours earlier, Michael had called my child a financial risk. My hand went to my belly, where the baby was kicking furiously, as if celebrating. What I'd done wasn't about revenge. I could have walked away quietly. Divorced him, taken a settlement, raised my daughter alone. I had the resources to do it. But I'd stayed and fought because he was still the CEO of a company that thousands of people worked for. Because other women might have been in similar positions. Because once you see corruption, you can't pretend you didn't see it. Over the next weeks, I worked with the board to establish new procedures. Succession planning that actually made sense. Transparency requirements. Oversight mechanisms. Systems that would protect future leaders and future families from exactly what had almost happened to me. I created a new policy: parental leave for any gender, with guaranteed authority restoration. I pushed for women on the executive team. I made sure that pregnancy and parenthood were treated as strengths, not risks. Michael cooperated. He had to. His authority was suspended pending the audit results, and he knew I controlled the narrative now. The pregnancy moved forward smoothly. Dr. Patel confirmed everything was healthy. The baby was thriving. And I was building something new. Not revenge. Not dominance. Just a company that operated with integrity and treated all people, regardless of gender, parenthood status, or position, with respect. 3 weeks after the shareholder meeting, I held my daughter for the first time. We named her Victoria, not after Michael's mother, but because the name means victory, and this little girl was born from standing up for what was right. Michael came to the hospital. He held his daughter, and I watched something shift in his face. Not redemption, exactly. But recognition. Recognition that what we'd created was real. That this child was a person, not a financial risk. That perhaps he'd made a terrible mistake. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't say it was okay. It wasn't okay." But I acknowledged it with a nod. The board's review revealed exactly what I'd suspected. Years of questionable decisions, poor financial judgment, and concerning power consolidation. Michael stepped down as CEO voluntarily before the official findings were released. He took a board position with significantly reduced authority. I didn't become CEO. I didn't need to. I had what I actually wanted: a voice, respect, and a company that understood what real strength looks like. The pregnancy that was supposed to be a financial risk became the catalyst for something better. For transformation. For justice that wasn't cruel, but necessary. In the end, the only person at risk was the one who'd never understood that quiet strength is the most powerful thing of all.